Oh,
Well,
wait.
good evening. How are you doing, Jeroen?
I'm doing good, Kathleen. How about you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Well, for our viewers and listeners, I want to introduce Jeroen Carelse. And Jeroen is in Finland, and I am struggling and stumbling over pronouncing his name correctly, but I did as best I could. Would you say your full name for us, please, Jeroen?
Okay, my first name is Jeroen, last name Carelse.
Thank you. Okay.
But we will do subtitles. It's just fine, you know.
We will do subtitles. Yes. So I have been doing a series of interviews, and I'm about to switch direction, or maybe come back to the original direction that I began. But I took a bit of a deviation during the initial number of years with the last couple of years. And now I'm coming back to something that is of utmost importance to all of us, for us to thrive and for us to flourish. And that is about our creative connection to living. Creativity equals consciousness. And I met Jeroen.
It's about
Jeroen a couple of
good.
years ago. And Jeroen is an artist, a professor, a philosopher, a man of tremendous knowledge of health and healing. He's a father, a husband. He is a man of tremendous integrity. And I have learned a tremendous amount from you through our conversations over the last number of years. And I've been excited about your philosophy about life, your philosophy about work, about your passions in life. And I really think that at this point in time, it's time to open this up so that more people, other than my own self here in these dialogues with you, can hear and learn and benefit. And so that's really what today's, I'm going to say, fireside conversation is going to be about. Really to ask you if you could share more of your philosophy so that we also can continue or perhaps begin to thrive in our lives at a time when the intention by the oligarchs is for us to do anything but thrive. And you hold some keys. You're a keystone in this. And I've come to call you a mystic as well, and truly mean that.
And the philosopher. My goodness.
Oh, definitely. Well, I know that came to me very early on. So, Jeroen, would you please just maybe give a little background about your life, your professional life, and your accomplishments, and how you perhaps arrived where you are right today, and just kind of in a snapshot, and then we'll go more deeply into the philosophy.
Well, keep the snapshot in mind, because I tend to wander off quite a bit. So basically, I'm born in '69 in the Netherlands. I'm Dutch, living in Finland right now. I'm not sure if I have a normal youth, but basically 3 brothers, father, mother. We used to live in a couple of places in the Netherlands. But quite early on in my life, I experienced kind of weird stuff, like little weird things, like what you would now call paranormal or something, but they were not really spectacular. I never really had anything super dramatic. But I was aware of that. What I experienced, most people didn't experience, because when I spoke about it, I was called like making it up or lying or this or that. So I learned to keep silent, and that sort of set the tone. I turned inwards, more or less. I began to read at a quite early age. But there were some funny things that my parents told me later. I was kind of young. I can't remember, maybe 4 or 5. We were sitting in the car, windows open, going through the countryside, and there were cows. And then you have, of course, the cow smell and the poo of the cow. And I didn't say something like, it's stinking here, or, I smell cow poo. But I was saying like, I get poo molecules to my nose, or something much more, specific. And of course, my father said, like, how did you come up with the word molecule? You have never, you were too young to say molecule to figure out what the molecule was. But that was one of those things. I was very early on interested in the world around me, how it was made. So I read things about nuclear energy. My father brought books from his work. It was his work. He brought home big books, and I started to read them, even though I don't really understand it. But there was something that I could pick up. So cold fusion or fusion or fission and all sorts of things. I was maybe 10 or 11, and that continued throughout my early, maybe to early 20s or something. But I went to high school. High school was for me a drama. I hated the place. I couldn't stand it, couldn't stand the people, the teachers, whatever. But after high school, I ended up at one art school. I was kicked out of that one art school. And then I entered another art school. That was, for me, a big success. I felt really at home there. And that sort of changed my life, because I started to feel that the things I wanted to do in life, I could do better in an environment where people were also creative, and there were not many boundaries. So,
were you always coming from a creative place? Can you point that?
Yes, yes, not so much my family. Later I figured out my father, he and I, we were very much alike, but we were also like water and fire. We had tremendous problems when I was young. But later, at some pivotal moment in my life, we became very close, and he became one of my best friends, actually. But he was creative himself. He was more in the world of energy, and he had to solve a lot of problems, and he had to visualize problems, and he was doing good work, I think. But he wasn't a creative person as in sense of drawing or playing the piano. I always liked to draw. And I used to have a drawing when I was 2 or 3 years old, and I was drawing an airplane from the bottom view in perspective view. And my parents didn't believe me that I had drawn that. So they thought my brothers, which were a bit older, had drawn that. And they're like, no, we haven't drawn that either, because they couldn't really draw that. They could basically do stick figures. So there was always something in me, but I was never this kind of miracle kid who could, draw beautifully. I could do things, but it didn't really bother me, interest me that much. I was using it once in a while to draw beautifully when I had to impress a girl, maybe, but other than that, it wasn't really that special for me. I was always looking for something else, always the reason why.
What were you looking for?
Well, always why things were as they were. So how did things work? I was the guy who took things apart but couldn't put it back together. And but I opened everything that I could put my hands on, like, coffee machines or bicycles and whatever. Of course, later I learned to put them back together, but I wanted to know why. And that was sort of that is the red thread throughout my life. Why? So now you said a snapshot, so let me jump ahead a bit. So after art school, actually halfway art school, I went to London for one workshop. I met my wife there. I moved to Finland, and there I had a chance to actually reinvent myself, because in the Netherlands I felt like there was always this history, how people saw me, and they couldn't disconnect from how they saw me a couple of years before. So I felt like something was holding back. Was sort of dragging me backwards the whole time. I couldn't move forward. So I was always fighting, and I didn't like that. Anyway, I entered Finland. I could reinvent myself. I could redefine myself. And then I noticed that, okay, so I am not really how other people say I am. I am actually somebody else. And
I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Isn't that
yeah,
the most interesting thing? That and you had told me something that you didn't speak the language, and so there was a certain amount of additional freedom
absolutely.
to not be programmed by that culture. So it gave
Yes,
you a place to kind of skate in between the lines.
yeah. Yeah, I stopped, basically from one day to the other, I stopped reading newspapers. I didn't watch television anymore because my language became English. I started to work at one university, and everybody was speaking English. So I had to learn to speak in Finland. I mean, my English is not that good, but I had to learn it here. But it gave me the opportunity to not get the messages or the messaging the whole day from the newspapers, the radio, the television. It gave me tremendous amount of time. That was one thing. And because we were quite early on in Finland, early in regards to the internet and the use of the internet. And when I arrived at the university, internet was normal. In my school in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, well, they still used a fax machine and letters, and we had email and access to databases and all sorts of things. So I started to connect quite early on to lots of people around the world, mostly scientists, and they were very approachable. They were replying. I met just amazing people, which you would now call famous people, and they were just replying to emails, and I learned a lot, and I could explore another side of me.
And what years were these? Just to place
95. 95. It's 95.
when
So
there was much more freedom.
yeah, there were just fewer people on the internet. That was one thing, and it was so much still about, at least I was exposed to research and to university networks. So it wasn't a lot of like Instagram or Facebook, but it wasn't at all there, of course. So when I came to Finland, I basically started a new life, and that gave me tremendous opportunities. I started to work on projects where people were asking me like, do you have a degree in mathematics? Or do you have a degree in this or that? And just because I use logical thinking, in my point of view, they assumed I needed to have some kind of degree, and I'm nothing. I basically barely finished high school. And I had not university. I was studying at the university. I was teaching at the university, but I still don't have a degree. So, but that didn't all matter. No, there was one person who ever asked me if I had a degree, and it wasn't even a question in regards to whether I would get a job or not. But he was just curious if I had studied mathematics or something, because logic. And so that didn't matter. My background didn't matter. I could reinvent myself. And then to jump ahead of time a bit, maybe in 2005 or something around 2005, so 10 years later, or no, even more. I look back, let's say 2010, I started to look back, and I realized that my life went up and down and up and down and up and down. And I was wondering, so why is this? So why have I no control over my life anymore? And then I got interested in what you would call philosophy. And, but for me, it's just like living. So I started to read about, of course, psychology first. I knew already a bit about that, biology, neurology, all the basic things. I started with that because I thought like, oh, maybe there's something in my brain or something is going on, or sociology. And none of these gave satisfying answers. Just a little bit I could learn. So I got more and more interested in the more esoteric disciplines. And well, there we are. I found more answers in the woo-woo stuff than in the regular science. And yeah, that changed my life basically. But it was always about whatever I learn, whatever I read, can I apply it in this life? I always have this practical side. I always want to know, okay, what if it's a pure belief that I have now? Is this belief strong enough to make something happen in this reality? Or is it just a belief inside my head and I live in a kind of fantasy world? Then it's for me kind of useless. It's interesting, but it's kind of useless. So, and this is actually what I brought with me from my background, from my father, who was very practical. He had to solve problems about energy and flows and pressures. So I always think that nice story, whatever it is, does it help me? How does it help me? And if it does help me, then I get interested, like, so how does it work? And when I did that time and time and time and time and time again, I started to see patterns. I started to see like, okay, so if these and these and these conditions are met, then the likelihood of something to happen in my life, something positive, is increasing. So I begin to build this kind of inside my head, this kind of scaffolding of elements that have to come together in order to improve my life. And I also learned during that whole phase not to try to improve other people's lives or to manipulate people or to tell them what to do or what to think. So
how did that part come about? Because so many people, when they discover something, the first thing they want to do is shout it out to the world, and they want everybody to know what they've done, and they want to change other people because they're so eager to to so-called share that. So how was it that you knew that it was not to be used that way? Because we're talking about
just by making mistakes.
Pardon?
Just by making mistakes. I just made mistakes. So I made mistakes not in this philosophical area or like what we can call consciousness, the topic that I like to research, consciousness. I made mistakes about energy. Years ago, there was this story about peak oil. Like, the energy supply won't last and blah, 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 blah. Might be true, might not be true, whatever, or something happens. But in that period, and that was totally my mistake, I navigated way too much on other people's opinions and I didn't do the homework myself. So I believed, and I believed so strongly that I became some kind of advocate for this whole idea about peak oil. And I wasn't too extreme, but extreme enough that it sort of affected my family. And I could see, in my family here, my two kids and my wife, they just didn't like it because it became more doom and gloom. And I learned from that tremendously. Like, okay, this is not the way to go. I didn't feel fine. I wasn't happy. I didn't feel healthy. So this was one of those moments again that I could see that, okay, again, my life goes down. Why does it go down? And I already had realized from other examples, from past examples, every time it goes down, I'm doing stuff that is not me. I'm doing stuff that people tell me I should do. I had a job which is like on paper, it's supposed to be a wonderful job. I studied industrial design and I got a job in Finland, which is like, I would have become junior vice president for a large telecom company and to set up the design department. And luckily it all went south. I mean, it didn't go anywhere, not because of me, but because of something else. But I was happy to leave because also in that period, it's supposed to be fantastic. It was horrible. I went to work with stomach pain. I knew something was wrong. I couldn't figure out like what was wrong. Later I figured it out, but at that time I didn't figure it out. Anyway, with the peak oil, I was in the same situation. Like, okay, hold on a second. This reminds me of the past moments something went wrong in my life. So I could stop that. I could get out of it. And so I learned from that. So it wasn't like that I knew these things. I just didn't. I had to learn and observe. And that's probably one of the most important lessons in my life. Somebody else told me, a physicist called Tom Campbell. In the early days, we were writing a couple of times back and forth. And I asked him the question, when it is about like improving life. So I asked Tom, like, but how do I know that my life, that I'm doing the right things? So that's, I would call it now that I'm authentic. I'm more myself. He gave a very simple, straight answer. He said, like, you will see it when you look at the people around you. When the people around you start to smile and approach you and, want to be with you, you're doing something right. Stay on that path. And that one and many other things, but basically those two things, they sort of came together in my head. Like, okay, I look at my family. They didn't look happy. They tried to avoid me a little bit because there comes father again, like, peak oil. And like, okay, stop it. So I learned from these things. And sort of in my life, people, or I read things at the right moment, or I hear things at the right moment. So these coincidences happened.
I'm sorry, the what happened?
Coincidences.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of coincidences. And yeah, I just learned to pick them up and to take them serious, and not to think like, yeah, it's just all nonsense. But so that's roughly how I began to understand that I had a bit more control. When I came to Finland, I started to see that still, even though I could redefine myself, I had these ups and downs. But even there, I started to see that, hey, I play a role here, and I can check on, actually quite many times a day if I'm doing the right thing. So what is the right thing then? And then I became interested in authenticity. So because if I am doing things that I really want, and those things lead to a better life, or I'm happier, I'm healthier, things starts to happen around me. Hold on a second. If this authenticity is then the central point, what does it mean to be authentic?
I'm going to interrupt you.
Yes.
An absolutely fascinating conversation.
But I warned you.
We have less than a minute. We have less than a minute, so we're going to close on this section. We're going to go to our next part of our conversation interview. I'll see you back.
Okay. Yes. Okay. All right. See you soon.
Okay.
Yeah. Bye.